The sun hung low over the bustling city streets, its golden light casting a warm glow on the sidewalks teeming with life. 12-year-old Marcus strolled along, clutching a small bag of groceries for his mother. His day had been ordinary until that moment, a moment destined to shatter his sense of safety. As Marcus passed a convenience store, a police cruiser screeched to a halt beside him. Officer Rick Larson stepped out, his sharp, imposing figure cutting through the air. His eyes scanned Marcus suspiciously, his hand resting on his belt as if preparing for a confrontation. "Hey, kid," Larson barked. "Where'd you get that stuff?" Confused, Marcus froze. "I bought it at the store," he stammered, lifting the bag to show its contents. Larson's eyes narrowed, his voice dripping with accusation. "Don't lie to me. I saw you loitering by that store earlier. What else is in your pockets?" Marcus felt his heart pound against his chest. He glanced at the passers-by, hoping someone would step in, but all he saw were averted eyes and hurried footsteps. "I didn't do anything wrong," he managed to say, his voice trembling. But Larson wasn't listening. The officer grabbed Marcus's arm, forcing him to drop the bag. The groceries scattered across the pavement, a loaf of bread, a carton of milk, and a few apples rolling away. "Empty your pockets," Larson ordered. Terrified, Marcus complied, pulling out a few crumpled dollar bills and his house key. Larson's expression remained cold, as if searching for something to justify his aggression. A small crowd began to gather at a distance. Some whispered among themselves, while others discreetly recorded the encounter on their phones. Among them, an older man in a suit watched with a frown, his phone held low but recording steadily. Marcus's voice cracked as he tried to explain. "My mom sent me to get groceries. I didn't steal anything." Larson smirked. "Kids like you always have an excuse. Let's see what the cameras say." The officer's words were laced with condescension, and Marcus felt tears welling up. He glanced around again, silently pleading for help. A woman stepped forward, but Larson's sharp glare made her hesitate. She backed away, shaking her head. As the situation escalated, Larson called for backup, exaggerating the details of the incident over the radio. Marcus could barely process what was happening. His small hands trembled as he clutched his empty pockets, his voice lost beneath the weight of fear. Minutes felt like hours until another officer arrived. This one, Officer Jenna Harris, seemed less inclined to jump to conclusions. She looked at Marcus, then at Larson, and frowned. "Rick, what's going on here?" Larson scoffed. Caught this kid loitering and acting suspicious. Might have lifted something from the store. Harris glanced at the spilled groceries and the frightened boy. Her eyes softened, but Larson's imposing presence kept her from speaking out directly. The older man in the crowd, still recording, stepped forward. "You sure about that, officer?" he asked, his voice calm but firm. Larson turned sharply. "Mind your business." The man smirked. "Oh, I am, and my business involves making sure this boy gets home safely." Larson glared but didn't respond. The crowd's murmurs grew louder as the tension escalated. Finally, Larson released Marcus with a dismissive grunt. "Get out of here, kid, and next time, think twice before acting shady." Marcus didn't wait for another word. He grabbed his scattered groceries and ran, tears streaming down his face. As he turned the corner, the older man followed discreetly, his phone still recording. What Marcus didn't realize was that this encounter wasn't over. It was only the beginning. The man with the phone knew exactly who the boy's father was, and he wasn't going to let this slide. Marcus burst through the front door of his family's home, his small frame trembling. His mother, Lillian, immediately noticed the fear in his eyes as he dropped the grocery bag onto the kitchen counter. "Marcus, what happened?" she asked, rushing to his side. He hesitated, struggling to find the words. "It was a police officer. He stopped me on the street. He thought I stole something." Lillian's face darkened with concern. "Did he touch you? Hurt you?" Marcus shook his head, though the weight of the officer's grip still lingered on his arm. "He made me empty my pockets. Everyone was watching. I didn't do anything. Mom, I promise." "I know, baby," she said, pulling him into a hug. "I know you didn't." At that moment, the front door opened, and a tall, broad-shouldered man stepped inside. This was David Coleman, Marcus's father and the CEO of one of the most influential logistics companies in the city. His commanding presence was undeniable, but it was his sharp mind and fierce determination that had earned him his success. "Hey, family," David greeted, setting his briefcase down. He immediately noticed the tension in the room. "What's going on?" Before Lillian could respond, Marcus stepped forward. "Dad, Something happened. David listened intently as his son recounted the incident, his expression shifting from concern to quiet fury. When Marcus finished, David's jaw tightened. Where did this happen? By the corner store, Marcus replied. A man in the crowd recorded it on his phone. I think he wanted to help. David's mind was already racing. Did the officer give you his name or badge number? No, Marcus said softly, but he called for backup. Another officer came, too. David nodded, his resolve hardening. All right, don't worry about this anymore, son. I'll handle it. That evening, David sat in his home office, combing through contacts on his phone. He was a man with powerful connections, politicians, attorneys, and community leaders, and he wasn't afraid to use them. After a few calls, he tracked down the man who had recorded the incident. The man's name was Henry Porter, a retired journalist with a penchant for exposing injustice. When David called him, Henry didn't hesitate to share the video. I saw what that officer did to your boy, Henry said. It was wrong. I've already uploaded the footage online. People need to see this. David watched the video in silence, his fists clenching as Larson's condescending voice filled the room. The fear on Marcus's face was like a dagger to his heart. The next morning, the video had gone viral. Local news outlets picked up the story, and the name Officer Rick Larson began circulating online. But David wasn't satisfied with public outrage, he wanted accountability. He arranged a meeting with his legal team and instructed them to investigate Larson's record. Within hours, they uncovered a troubling history, complaints of misconduct, excessive force, and racial profiling. None of the complaints had led to disciplinary action. David's next move was strategic. He contacted a trusted journalist at a prominent news station and provided them with the video, the officer's record, and a statement. This is not just about my son. This is about every family who has suffered in silence. It's time for change. The story aired that evening, sparking a firestorm. Protests erupted outside the police station, demanding Larson's suspension. Social media lit up with calls for reform, and community leaders rallied behind David. Meanwhile, Officer Larson watched the chaos unfold from his home. His confidence began to waver as he realized the man behind the uproar wasn't just any father, he was someone with the power to dismantle his career. Larson's phone buzzed with calls from his superiors, demanding explanations. He tried to downplay the incident, but the evidence was undeniable. His arrogance had finally caught up with him. As the pressure mounted, David prepared for the next phase of his plan. He wasn't just seeking justice for Marcus, he wanted to expose the systemic failures that allowed officers like Larson to operate unchecked. The city was alive with unrest. The video of Officer Rick Larson's treatment of Marcus had ignited a wave of outrage, spreading beyond local protests to national headlines. For the first time in his career, Larson felt the weight of accountability pressing down on him. Inside the police station, the atmosphere was tense. Larson sat across from Chief Reynolds, his face pale but defiant. This whole thing is being blown out of proportion, Larson argued, his voice laced with frustration. Reynolds glared at him. Blown out of proportion? That video is everywhere, Rick. Do you realize how bad this makes us look? And your record isn't exactly clean. Larson scoffed. I did my job. The kid looked suspicious. The chief leaned forward, his voice dropping to a deadly calm. You didn't just stop a random kid, Rick. You stopped the son of David Coleman. Do you have any idea who that man is? He's got the resources and the public's ear. This department is under fire because of you. Larson opened his mouth to respond, but the chief cut him off. For now, you're on administrative leave. And trust me, that's the least of your worries. Outside the station, protesters chanted for justice. News crews swarmed the area, broadcasting live updates. Among them stood David Coleman, his imposing figure commanding attention as he addressed the crowd. My son was humiliated and terrorized for no reason other than a baseless assumption, David said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. This is not just about one officer, it's about a broken system. But we will not be silent. We will not let this happen again. The crowd roared in agreement, their signs held high. Justice for Marcus, they chanted. Meanwhile, Larson's life was unraveling. His name and face were plastered across social media, accompanied by hashtags like #JusticeForMarcus and #AccountabilityNow. Former victims of his misconduct began to come forward, sharing their stories. What had once been whispers in the shadows now became a tidal wave of accusations. One evening, Larsson sat in his living room, scrolling through the hateful messages flooding his phone. His hands trembled as he read the headlines: Officer Rick Larsson exposed, a pattern of abuse. The pressure was too much. Desperate to salvage his reputation, Larsson decided to appear on a local news program to defend himself. But the interview quickly backfired. "I've always acted in the best interest of public safety," Larsson insisted, his tone defensive. The interview didn't let up. "How do you explain the video, Officer Larsson? A terrified child, no evidence of wrongdoing, and a history of complaints against you." Larsson stumbled over his words, but the damage was done. The public saw him for what he was, a man hiding behind a badge. While Larsson floundered, David Coleman was busy ensuring real change. He met with city officials, demanding reforms to hold officers accountable. He also funded community programs aimed at fostering trust between law enforcement and the neighborhoods they served. Weeks later, the final blow came. An internal investigation concluded that Larsson had violated multiple policies, leading to his termination. The announcement was met with widespread relief and celebration. But for David, the journey wasn't just about one man losing his job. It was about setting a precedent. Standing with Marcus on the steps of City Hall, he addressed the crowd one last time. "This fight isn't over," David declared. "Today, we took a step toward justice. But we must remain vigilant. For every Marcus, there are countless others who still need our voices." Marcus looked up at his father with a mix of pride and gratitude. He had learned that strength didn't come from anger but from standing up for what was right. As the crowd cheered, Larsson watched from his now empty home, a man stripped of the power he had once abused. His career was over, his reputation in ruins. And though he seethed with resentment, he couldn't escape the truth: the world had seen him for who he truly was. For Marcus and his family, it wasn't just a victory, it was a reminder that even in the face of injustice, the truth could prevail when good people refused to back down.